Góðan daginn og velkomin á fyrstu Málstofu vetrarins. Ég ætla að skipta yfir í ensku svo að fyrirlesarar skilji nú hvað ég að segja. I want to welcome Stig Falk-Petersen. He is a very prominent scientist and has been in a close collaboration with our planktonic group at the Institute. He has a special interest in biology in the polar regions. But I think this is as far as I can go in narrowing him down in his research interest. He seems to be all over, and which is good. And he has been also done a lot of teaching and has educated a lot of new scientists. And we are so lucky to have one amongst us, Hildur. So we have been looking forward to hear your talk on climate change in Wales and bits and pieces of that.
Yeah. So thank you. Well, I can add that I was born in Lofoten, so fishery district, in very similar to Reykjavik or Iceland in general. So I've also been interested in the sea. When I was a kid, it was not popular to be a fisherman, so I became a marine scientist instead. But now today is to be a fisherman very popular again, which is very good. So I will talk about, if you see this picture here, it's actually from north of Svalbard. It's called the Whalers Bay area, and it was a whaling going on for more than 100 years in this area. And it was believed that the stock could be on Bowhead whales, it could be as big as 100,000 animals, which went on for more than 100 years, and it must have been a very, very profitable business for the Dutch ship owners, or mainly from Amsterdam, which sends the ships up there to catch whale, which is of course with a lot of loss of ships and men during this period. So when you are working, living up in the north, you always are interested in climate and how that influence the ecosystem, but of course it's also influenced the society as such. So I will talk a little around that. The story here actually starts a little in 2012. We had a cruise, teaching cruise to Kongsfjord, which we had for many years. But in 2012, in January, we saw that the cruise should start actually in November because of the ship was in the shipyard. It was delayed until January. And then we saw that as you see here, that the area north of Svalbard was ice-free. So this was the chance to be on the first real cruise up north of Svalbard in January when the area was ice-free, which is not normal, has been normal. So we threw all our plans in the bin and set course north of Svalbard to the Whalers Bay here, and what you see there is the transect we took from Ripfjord. Actually, Ripfjord is Cornelius von Rijp, who was the captain on the third ship of Barents expedition. So we took this section crossing Sofiadjupet to the ice, and back again to Svalbard, to Muffen. Muffen is a place for the whalers to stay. So how could it be that a large-scale whaling took place for more than 100 years north of Svalbard? It's really a place that until 1990, this area was covered by ice the whole winter and most of the summer. And how has the Whalers Bay changed during the whaling periods? The ice cover there is a question. And what was the physical and biological mechanism that sustained the Bowhead whale population over such a long time? And how climate and ice cover influence the society, fishery, and whaling in the high north. So that's some of the questions which interested us, and we were so lucky that a former scientist at the Norwegian Polar Institute actually had went to the archives in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam and looked on the logbooks from the whaling ships back to 1587. So there are a record of the ice cover in August in this area, dating back to nearly 1600. So we have this data, and we have of course updated it with modern. So I just show you some more data here. It's a proxy sample of the sea surface temperature in August outside Møre or Nordland. You see the dot up there, and you had some cold periods here, and you had some warmer periods, of course, which coincide with the settlements on Iceland around year 900 and 1000. And you had the medieval warm period, and then you had the very cold period, started around 1500, which lasted actually until 1900, with a little warmer periods in between. And this is the sea surface temperature in the Atlantic current. So temperature has varied with more than 1.5 degrees over this period, which is a lot. And I also added a little graph on the top there, which is modern data here, taken by the Polish group. Shows that the temperatures increased until 2006. This is outside Kongsfjorden, and then it's been more or less stable. So we see that this really shows that its climate have varied a lot over this period we are talking about, and of course influenced the settlement on Iceland. I took this graph here also. It's a graph from Lange Lake there. I'll just put it here because it's again interest for Iceland. So this is taking the temperature from year 2000 until today. It's a paper by Divini and Isaksson, published in 2010. It shows that this is from Svalbard Lake in Svalbard, so it shows the temperature on Svalbard area, but it's also very representative from Iceland and from mainland Norway, Vardø there. And we can see that it's actually on Iceland, the good times on Iceland, what lasted until 1100, it was up to 5 degrees warmer on Svalbard than it is today. And then the temperature decreased, and in 1650, which is a really cold area, and again 1783 when you have the Lange eruption, it's really very, very cold, nearly up to 10 degrees colder than today. So it's that climate has varied in north. We all know, and we see the population of Iceland here. In 2095, you probably know this better than me. So, but it was nearly 77,000 people, and it decreased to 38,000 in 1780. And I has been told that the Danish king did not bother to send a ship to Iceland to collect tax in this period because there was no tax to collect. So the climate has a big influence on society, is of course true, and I of course read the book of Bergsvein Birgisson about den svarte viking, Geirmundur Heljarskin, who settled in 867. That was a little early to me, because it's, I don't know if that settlement took place a little later in Iceland. But I learned that actually this area, which was warm, it was so warm they could grow grain here. And you also had slaves here in Iceland, as we had in Norway. And you was hunting walrus. So that's a warm period, and around 1100 it was the end of the growth of grain on Iceland. And 1600 and 1650 was really cold in Europe, when you had these frozen lakes in Holland and also on Thames, and was a crop failure and famine in Holland. And you had some wars there. Talk a little about that later, but and then in 1783 you had the Lake eruption. That was some date where it was really cold. But already in 1693 actually it was less ice around Svalbard. I will come back to them. And then 2 French frigates went north of Svalbard, an area which had been ice covered into 1670, and took the Dutch whaling fleet in the Sorgfjord. They called it the Baie de Ørs, which is Hinlopen Strait. This is the northern part of Svalbard. And then in 1872 to 1883, you had the large cod fisheries of Spitsbergen. And again in the 1930s, you had a large cod fishery. And in 1938, our famous Norwegian oceanographer was at 82 degrees north. So this is the famous cold period where Karl X Gustav took his troops over to on Storebelt, on the ice, and conquered Copenhagen. And the Skåne became Swedish. So he was able to take his troops from the mainland, from Germany, and over the Storebelt, and took Skåne. So this was really a cold period. And you have another famous Swede, Karl XII. He actually attacked Germany and he attacked Russia, which actually I think is a stupid idea for most European countries. It's never been very successful. And this was actually also a cold period, especially in Russia. And of course he went over there with 40,000 people and escaped with 1,200. And then he went to Romania in Ottoman Empire, and was in prison there. Then he escaped and came back to Sweden, and the first thing he did was actually to attack Norway. And then the army, especially the army which attacked Trøndelag or Trondheim, and then was when they gave up and was marching back, they were caught with a big storm, and 3,000 of the 5,000 soldiers died. So that was the end of the Swedish fighting and to be a big power. And also you have Le Grand Armée from Napoleon, also another European who wanted to conquer Russia. He marched out with 400,000 people and returned with 30,000. Also caught by a very, very severe winter, where you actually had a temperature which was already, this was the little ice age, and the years he was there, it was really, really cold. So, and I took this, because I'm from Lofoten. In this period, 20% of the newborn in Lofoten died because of famine. So it was a tough period with a harsh climate. And then you have the last European conqueror, Hitler, who wanted to take Russia again. And here you see the Sverdrup at 82 degrees, which his submarine, he was going, the idea was to actually to navigate under the ice cap and come up in the US with this Nautilus submarine. But luckily the rudder didn't work, so they didn't come under the ice. So but they was actually north to 82 degrees, so the ice was as far north as 82 degrees in 1931. And in this period here, from 1910 approximately to 1940, the temperature in northern hemisphere increased with nearly 2 degrees, and the prognosis from the German scientists was that it would be a good time for try to conquer Russia. So he started out again. But just here, if you have a little of the story here, it's actually the Hilfkreuzer comet. They went in 1940. They went around the Northeast Passage. It was open. There was no ice there, and the Northeast Passage has really been closed and impossible to navigate until the 30s. And the Germans were so afraid that the Americans should come through the strait and have their fleets into the European waters that they sent the Admiral Scheer north into the Belkitsky Strait. And then you have the Operation Barbarossa, the Battle of Stalingrad, 5 million people who died there. And then these years actually was -4 to -8 below the average before. So this was an extremely cold period. And you can also see that this is a graph showing the temperature north of 70 degrees. And you see here, it's warming up here, but then it's decreasing exactly this 1940. It's a cold period in the north, not only in Russia, but also in and then you have from Iceland. I found this graph here. It shows that Iceland has an extreme variation in climate. It shows that the temperature increased by nearly a little more than 1 degree from 1920s until 1940s, and then decreased again. So here you are on the probably the 2 climate system. Shows that the climate variation in Iceland is huge, and as you probably know better than me, that this influenced the fishing stocks a lot. I also found this graph from Sargasso Sea, which shows the temperature in the Sargasso Sea, and it shows that the temperature was very favorable during the settlement on Iceland. The temperature was probably higher than today. So Iceland and Arctic is probably the place on Earth which has the greatest variation in climate. And then back to the ice. This is the ice cover of in Svalbard waters, covering period 1579 to 2716, and it's inserted here. Is Svalbard, so we here. So we see the ice has varied from south of Svalbard to north of Svalbard, from 76 to 82 degrees over this long period. And it fits well actually with the general climate picture from Europe, but it's also in some instances different. We see that the period here from 1600 till approximately 1670 was a lot of ice around Svalbard. And this 1658 was the time when King Carl X Gustav took his troops over the Storebelt and conquered Denmark. But already in 1693, the French frigates was far north of Svalbard. So the ice retreated very, very fast. In some 10 years, it retreated from south of Svalbard to north of Svalbard. And then you had some ups and downs until 1783 when you had the Lange eruption and you had the cooling again. And I just inserted here the whaling period. So here you can see that the maximum whaling period was exactly the same as when you had little ice cover around Svalbard and a little dip here. Then it increased. It was the cold period with little ice there in the middle of this period, and then it ended around 1800. The whaling. It was believed that the whale stock was hunted to extinction, but it could also be that it was actually the primary production was shut off due to heavy ice conditions, so there was no primary production, no secondary production in the area with the bowhead whale has been feeding before. And also the 1870 and the 1930, I think it was a large fisheries at Svalbard, but it was also good times in Iceland, I guess, for fisheries. The fisheries 1870 lasted for exactly 10 years. Only 1 or 2 year classes which they fished on. In the 1930s, they lasted a little longer until the war, of course. But it was a large fishery in Svalbard. So we see here that the ice cover in the Barents Sea, as Svalbard waters, including the Barents Sea, has varied a lot during the period, and it actually influenced the marine production a lot. So again, I asked the question, what's the physical and biological mechanism that sustain the bowhead whales population for more than 100 years? So that's the question for this paper we published from the findings in the Whalers Bay. And what happened, when we sail north, we have been up in this area in August many years. And this is a typical situation. You have this freshwater layer on the top, which prevent the nutrients to come to the surface, and you have a low productivity area in the area which is influenced by melting of the sea ice. And you see the same, it was the same data from Nansen in his voyage with Fram, that which actually you have this lid of light water on the top of the nutrient-rich Atlantic water, which prevent primary production to take place. And this was the ice conditions. This is the ice conditions in January, and you see that it was opened in January 2012 in what they call the Whalers Bay, and actually it opened up all the way up to Franz Josef Land later in the seasons. And this is the blue one is the mean ice extents in from 1979 to 2011. Shows that this area used to be ice cover. And if you look on this graph here only, this is the graph which is taking from this area. Shows the ice cover in this area in January. And you see that the ice has, after 1998, these areas has been opened for most of the years. So this is the Whalers Bay, where the whaling took place during the Dutch whaling period. And what did we discover? It was a chimney of warm, nutrient water, which was coming up to the surface from of Atlantic water. You see it's broken through the low density water and coming up to the surface. And how can this be? You know the low pressure passing Iceland, coming up along the coast of Norway, and then it goes around Svalbard, and it's coming. Winds comes from north of Svalbard. Storm here in January. Then you have a typical situation which you have. You have an upwelling along the coast, a typical Ekman transport. The surface layer are blown off the coast, and you have a upwelling of nutrient-rich water along the shelf break. This is in January. And this has also been shown by Timchenko, that during summer the Atlantic core water is a little farther from the seashore, while in winter wind blows off the surface water, and you will have the core of Atlantic water coming closer to the shelf break, and you will have an upwelling of Atlantic nutrient water if you don't have ice, which we do. And also, this, of course, was new for us, that the colonist population was already up into the surface water in January, which is 1.5 months before what we believed before, which we believed it was in March, April it usually comes. So you have already in January you have the zooplankton in the surface water ready to eat as soon as the bloom starts in middle of March. And then we had a cruise, 2 cruises in 2016 and 17, and then we found these mesopelagic layers, which consisted of Meganophytis norwegica, also Sebastis larvae, and the traditional larvae there. So there are plenty of food up there. It's already, the primary production there is zooplankton is opened up, so you have primary production, you have a large secondary production, and you have a large production of fish and large zooplankton in this area. Like a traditional. And then you have, of course, the lateral migration, which is of whales, capelin, cod, and seals to feed on this food. And you have the classical food chain. You have the phytoplankton, you have the lipid-rich copepod, and you have the whales. And of course, this is the same food chain as you have in Iceland. But this food chain also exists now north of Svalbard because of you have this upwelling in north of Svalbard. And the bowhead whale has returned up north. You find them again following the same highways that they did before, feeding in this area. So question is also valid for the as much for the Icelanders as for the Norwegians. And this is the ice cover showed here. This is the in 1769, it was as little ice as today in April. So this is the spring. So in this period, you have had open water north of Svalbard, and you have an upwelling, like you have in Benguela, so you have a high production. While in the 1860s and the 60s, you had ice covered, so you had much smaller area available for primary production. So is this the real reasons for the variation of the fish stocks in the north? And we can forget all other questions like recruitment and that's, so it's just the total primary production which determine the stocks of fish and seals in the north. So that's the question. At least the whales are back north of Svalbard, and probably be the future fisheries there for whales and also for cod. Thank you. So that's the story. Please, if you have questions or comments, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much. It was very enlightening. I'm sure many people have some questions to this issue or to this lecture.
You were mentioning...
Excuse me.
Gudmundur Óskarsson here at the Institute. You were mentioning quantity of fish as well as the mammals, whales. I guess there are not much information about the quantity of fish back in time in this area. I'm thinking about polar cod or whatever.
No, but it's very clear that these whaling periods took place when it was little ice, but also the fishes in 1870s was also a period with little ice, and in 1930s was a period with little ice, and today, of course, it's little ice. It's also good fisheries. Probably never been as large stocks in the north for hundreds of years up north. Of course, we don't have any stock estimates back then, but we have. But there are some information on these fishes in the 1870s, and also the 1930s there are some information. They were in the 1870s. They were fishing on 1 year class, so it must be, and it was a very short period because you had the little ice period lasted only for 30 years, so it was only probably a short period with high premium production, secondary production, and then the ice came down again. 1930s was much longer and lasted, and the fisheries lasted probably till 1940, but it was not coming back in the 50s and 60s. So it's when it was a lot of ice again. So I think this is probably the main reason for it's just a total area available for prime production that's actually on the background for the large stocks we have now. Of course, then we are all out of business at work. So simple.
Maybe I can ask one question. It seems to be a quite significant impact to this area, the polar area, or the opening of the ice cover. And I'm wondering if there is like a monitoring going on of the change in biodiversity others than the whale swimming up there. Is there some kind of a more cover all project going on, monitoring these changes?
Institute of Marine Research in Norway have this regular cruises there, and they are doing the monitoring as you do in here, and that's also a lot of research projects going on around in the Arctic now, from sponsored by the Norwegian government, both for political reasons and for scientific reasons. Because this is Norwegian territory. We had an agreement with the Russians about the boundaries between the Norwegian and Russia, but still it's an area where Norway wants to show that they are active.
So it looks like everybody had a lot of things to think about, and it was very interesting. So thanks again for showing this to us.